What's the purpose of living? Suffering. David O. says there's about 7.7 billion people on Earth. If you eliminate one person every 10 seconds, it will take you 2,500 years to eliminate everyone on Earth. Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. That means if, when you saw Jesus coming, you started knocking people off one by one every 10 seconds, you still need another 500 years to finish the job. 55 million people die every year. That's about 2 deaths per second. In the time I took to write the sentence, 10 people have died. By the end of today, 150,000 people would have died. Every 6 weeks, the entire population of Singapore of 6 million people is wiped out. The total number of humans in history is estimated to be 100 billion. That means only 7.7% of everyone who has ever lived is alive today. 92.3% are buried under our feet. Behind each of these deaths was a father, mother, friend, lover, son, daughter, brother, sister, musician, doctor, teacher, inventor, business tycoon, king, emperor, thief, robber, rapist, murderer, dictator, lawyer. Behind each of these deaths was someone who lived a life not unlike yours, each with his or her own struggles, dreams, hopes, fears, disappointments. Yet, what's left of these 100 billion lives? Perhaps life is not about achieving the lofty greatness of Shakespeare or Einstein or Napoleon. Perhaps life is about your personal impact on others rather than humanity as a whole. But is that so? You probably remember your grandfather, but what can you tell me about his father? Does anyone still remember him, or has he faded into oblivion? That even his name has been forgotten, much less his deeds? And why would it be any different for you or the 150,000 that will die today? That's just human lives, but the scope of life is larger than just human lives. Remember the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park? That was 150 million years ago. Those were living things too, of course. Now they power your cars. In fact, once you start including other living things, the picture gets worse, with 99% of all species that has ever lived on Earth. 5 billion species extinct. With this in mind, and considering the number of living things in unimaginably long time span, do you really think there's any purpose to life? By purpose, I assume you mean meaning or reason for existing. There is none. Nature is a blind machine. Suffering. That's not the purpose of life. It's merely the consequence of life. It has 3.7 thousand upvotes. Mark Rubin says, well, if you would have started knocking out people back in Jesus' time, there would be a person less to procreate basically every 10 seconds. So those many generations of descendants of that person would have never been born. To count that, you'll need a more complicated math than that. David O says, that's a really good point. I doubt you would need as long as the population would be way lower then. There also would be a lot of people ganging against you to stop you from knocking out more people, so it's even more complicated. You are such a wonderful human being. Anonymous says, purpose is a human concept and only human creations, like machines, procedures, rules, etc., exist with a purpose. Universe and nature, no purpose. They just change due to internal and external factors. And this is how life came to be. Earth's atmosphere changed. Earth's surface changed. Earth's molecules changed into forming cells. Cells changed into forming organisms. Organisms changed into becoming increasingly self-aware. And there you are alive and conscious for a short period of time. If compared to the existence of the planet and the universe, and with no purpose because you're not a designed object. Or are we? The best you can do is take good care of your brief life and consciousness because they are rare and unique. The rocks would envy you if they could feel a thing. You have all eternity to be as dead as a rock and only some decades to be alive and self-aware. Able to run, to sing, to feel the sun, the wind and the rain. Able to choose, to laugh, to love, to eat and drink, and all the infinity of things that make life. Look for simple sensory pleasures that depend only on you being alive, and not complex ones that depend on other people. If you can, go somewhere where you can watch animals at freedom for some time, even if they're just sparrows in a park. They are there living the best way they can, while they can, without ever feeling sorry for themselves, because they just accept life without looking for a purpose. Darwin Stevenson, who is a spiritual guide, says, let's go to the heart of the question. How do I make sense of a world where suffering exists? Moreover, what is the meaning of life? Why am I here? Why are we here? And how do answers to these questions reconcile with suffering? Right? Wouldn't we all like answers to these questions without the usual caveats of we can't know God's ways, obscuring a solid answer? Before I give you the answer, recognize that your mind is going to react in one of the three ways. That answer doesn't fit within my belief system. I like that. 2, that answer is too simple and must be more complicated. 3, that's an answer I hadn't considered. The question referenced suffering, so I'll begin there. We start by asking, why is suffering part of life? And let's not avoid the elephant in the room by not asking, why does God allow suffering? Suffering is neither intended nor allowed, but rather is a necessary possibility in a life that includes free will. If you have full control to choose what to do in your life, then the outcomes cannot be controlled. When the outcomes of your choices are governed by another, you do not have free will, but rather a supervised existence. Like a toddler that can play anywhere but their parent intervenes when they get too close to danger. A supervised existence provides the illusion of free will, but not true independence. We keep investigating by asking, why is free will necessary? It's great to desire free will, but another to understand why life necessitates free will. Moreover, why does the purpose of life require free will? This question is at the core of understanding suffering. If life gives me full control and that opens me up to the possibility of suffering, what is the point? The depths of human suffering go really deep, so a life without any protections from suffering had better have a purpose. Accordingly, if you have 4 paths to consider here, 1. Life is purposeful and that purpose requires free will. 2. Life is purposeful, but free will is not required. We are governed by God, and suffering is allowed or bestowed by God. 3. Life is not purposeful, and free will is required. 4. Life is not purposeful and doesn't require free will. My answer supposes number 1 is true. Traditional religions are aligned with number 2. Atheists would go with number 4. Number 3 is nonsensical, but I included it as a potential choice. Assume number 1 is true, for now, and that your life has meaning and free will is required, presumably because it is aligned with your purpose. You could go with number 2, but that means God gave you the illusion of free will, and will keep you from suffering as long as you live a life in alignment with His intentions. Sounds good, except it doesn't reconcile with the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Before you give up on God with number 4, and there not being any method to life, try to consider number 1. This is where your mind freaks out, realizing 2 major parts of number 1. Life has purpose, which means we all have a purpose, which means I have a purpose. Number 2, God is not protecting us, which means that God is not protecting anyone, which means that God is not protecting me, and that is scary. These lessons are really hard for the mind to accept because they shatter our belief systems. The mind is a logical machine, and it doesn't like operating without an established framework. That's a belief system that the mind compares new information against to determine what is true and what's not true. When new information potentially invalidates one's belief system, the mind fights back by not agreeing with the new information. When we can only accept the possible truth, considering a new belief system requires abandoning the previous belief system. Westerners struggle with this, but Easterners are more comfortable exploring multiple potential truths. The reason is that culturally, Easterners are much more comfortable with more than one thing being true. The point is to accept your mind's rejection of new ideas, as how it is wired to work without actually rejecting new ideas like this prematurely. Accordingly, I offer number 1 as a possible belief system for the mind to consider in pursuing this question. If I have a purpose and that purpose requires free will, then my purpose must involve making choices that have to be made without coercion. Otherwise, I'm not actually making the choice, but rather I'm simply doing what I've been told to do. Accordingly, suffering is neither intended nor allowed, but rather is a necessary possibility in a life that includes free will. In short, without supervision, there is the possibility of things going really wrong. Suffering. What I would like you to consider is that you have a purpose, and so does all of life. In this, you have a purpose, and humanity has a purpose. Or rather, life that evolves to be conscious has a purpose, and everyone's individual purpose is in harmony with that big picture purpose. That purpose is to choose love. That's it, you say? That's the entirety of humanity's purpose. That's right, and that's a massive purpose to attain. Here's why. Before you, before your parents, before your grandparents, before your ancestors, before mankind, before the earth, before the universe, before all there was only God. And if there was only God, then God was and is a singularity. Only God, nothing else. What is God? God is love, and love is God. The world's religions know this to be true. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. One of the 99 names of Allah is Al-Wadud, the All-Loving. In the Sahih Muslim Hadith, the Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, "You will not enter paradise until you believe, and you will not believe until you love one another." These references are not offered as proof, but rather to show that God being love is not a far-fetched idea. God as a singularity was incomplete, as love is only fully actualized when it is shared freely with another. And thus God, in order to become complete, created the universe so that one day life could emerge and evolve to become conscious beings that could freely choose love. When everyone freely chooses love, God will be complete. And in order for love to be fully actualized, it must be chosen without coercion. God couldn't create life in a way that we followed his rules, but that wouldn't enable us to have free will and be able to choose love or not. In order for the choice to actually be a choice, we have to be able to choose it or not without divine consequences. Accordingly, life is not supervised by God, and human suffering is a necessary possibility that we could experience. That's why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people. God could intervene, but that would negate the free will-based purpose of us being here in the first place. Enlightenment starts with a question. If you have a question, please ask it on Quora and request me to answer. Darwin Stevenson.